No other than Dr. Skip Rizzo, who is a legend around these parts. He also has been using virtual reality longer than some of us have been alive. He's best known, if you don't know him, for his work with PTSD, won an award from the APA, American Psychological Association, in 2010 for his contribution of using virtual reality for PTSD, particularly war-related traumas, but has applied this technology to many other applications, and now is really at a point in his career where he's trying to figure out, I would say, how do we really get this into the hands of everyday people, which is the theme, I think, of much of this morning's conference. Could say a lot more about Dr. Rizzo. He is the director of the Institute for Creative Technologies at at USC. We want him at Cedars-Sinai. That may never happen, but thank you very much for being here today, and I can't wait to hear your talk. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I got 20 minutes and a lot of slides, so I'm going to talk really fast. But before I do that, thank you, Brennan. You know, it was, 2019 when we all got together last time, pre-COVID. We tried to do it online, and that was great, but there's nothing like being together and getting to have all the conversations, and you did such an incredible job, and a great talk, too, an epic talk. So thank you, and I think he deserves a little applause from everybody here. Okay, now I got the obligatory thank the organizer part of the talk done. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is beyond efficacy. We're going to see a lot of stuff about how VR is making a difference in terms of measurable gains with our clinical populations. But I want to focus on breaking down barriers to care. And this is the direction my career is going now, moving a little bit less time in the lab and more working in the outside world, and trying to develop ways that we can get this stuff out to make a difference. So that'll be the focus of the talk now. And just a little roadmap, a little bit on efficacy, a model for barriers to care, and then if I have time, some conclusions. So, all right, efficacy. As Brennan mentioned earlier on, we've got meta-analyses, and we've got meta-analyses of meta-analyses, reviews of reviews. It's all in a positive direction. You know, certainly science never sleeps. We have to keep doing this, but we've got a good rudder. We've got 25 years of good science that tells us where we can make a difference and what we need to do next to maybe better specify who can benefit, what are the active ingredients in any application that we can emphasize that will make more of an impact and so on. So we're in good shape on that. I just want to brag about one of our efficacy studies just recently came out, our largest randomized controlled trial with PTSD versus VR versus traditional methods. And everybody got good. We didn't see a difference across the whole population, but in pre-planned predictions, we predicted folks that had depression, comorbid depression, would do better in VR. And that, in fact, was what we found. And you know, as you saw in the last talk, depression is an important area to address. It's common in PTSD, and this moves us more closer to you know, specifying and recommending VR to certain populations where we think it can make a difference. It's an emotionally evocative technology. We can activate emotion. That's what we're in the business of in clinical care. Also, 76% of the people at the beginning of the trial, if they had their choice, would have picked VR. So that's a big thing. Anyway, reviews of reviews. These things are coming out all over the place. We need more, of course. We need to do it a little bit better. But also, when clinicians weigh in, we're getting positive findings. So this is from 2013. It's done every 10 years, a Delphi analysis, and ask clinicians what they think is going to be the next big thing over the next 10 years. And in this one, from that decade, VR came in 4th place. 4 of the top 5 were tech-based, online CBT or online mental health, mobile apps, so on and so forth. This was just updated, well, in 2021. It seems like yesterday with COVID time compression. but VR moved to second place. So, we know we've got clinicians' attention, that this is something that people expect that are in the trenches to be something that can add value. So when we think about barriers to care, which is, efficacy is one thing, but the idea that, with our PTSD approach, more people would have preferred to do it in VR. That's a little tiny bit of evidence towards a way to break down barriers to care, because people are often resistant to seek help in traditional methods. So I got really lucky when I was thinking about this, found 8 words that all begin with A. So it's the 8 A's of barriers to care. There's about 2 more that are candidates, but I only got 20 minutes. But I'll go through each one of these and talk about how, basically the best evidence-based approach isn't going to make a bit of difference if people can't access it. So first step, awareness. Stole this from Brennan, great slide. Scientific awareness. It's growing, it's evolving. We're continuing to get results, getting it in the scientific context here, but also awareness with the general population. If you watch the Super Bowl, not this year, but last year, you may have seen this. And no matter what you want to say about Meta, they have driven a level of public awareness of VR that didn't exist before Oculus. And you have to give that to them, all sins aside. So this was a cool thing. And, a lot of times people tune into the Super Bowl to watch the commercials, which is kind of a cool thing. And so out of that minute and 45-second, very costly advertisement, we had, 112 million people looking at it, getting an awareness of VR. This year they had a smaller commercial. I don't think it was that good. It focused on Horizon. Sorry if there's any Meta employees here, but also awareness every day. You look at online news entities, there's always something about VR every day. If you put it in your Google thing, it'll pop up as well. Major media organizations, television, newspapers, so on. We're getting out there. The public is learning about it. When you look at this study from 2020, a large percentage of people were aware that it was used to treat mental illness. However, there was questions in this sample about whether it was evidence-based. People weren't sure. A large percent just didn't know. And when you ask them about the evidence base, most people, scored 3 and below. They weren't sure. It wasn't in the public consciousness. Yes, this is not just some Star Trek sci-fi thing. It's actually evidence-based care. But if the clinician suggested it, then their belief in the anticipated benefit would go up and they would be more likely to use it. So clinicians are key in this, as of course, as Brenda mentioned, all we're doing is creating tools to extend and amplify the skills of well-trained clinicians. So clinicians are key to enhancing that. Brennan's group did a Facebook study on this a while back, and 74% of people, not systematically collected, just people that volunteered, had a positive perception. And interesting, women had a higher value of VR in the clinical space than men. Anticipated benefit, again, maybe measured by people's likelihood to seek a treatment because they think it's going to benefit them. This is from 2007, work out of Spain, 76% showing an interest in VR over traditional exposure therapies, lower refusal rate. Another A is the availability of well-trained providers. We've gone through awareness and anticipated benefit. Now we need more providers that know this area, know how to implement it professionally and ethically. And this, it makes a case for it. They cite a study showing if you look at all the counties in the United States and you look at the number of mental health professionals in each county and you look at the suicide rate in each county, you see a big negative correlation. So less care providers, higher suicide. gross measure, but I think it's important. So how do we enhance professionals knowing how to do this or knowing how to deliver care? VR has a role in that, not just for doing VR therapy, but for doing other therapies. So you can build virtual patients. And these are just some videos from our lab, from the history of some of our work. 2007 at Keck Medical, medical students practicing a clinical interview with a sexual assault survivor. 2012, we built out one for the School of Social Work, for their military social work program, helping them to give novice clinicians a chance to screw up with a virtual patient before they get their hands on a live one, and particularly in the suicide context. Then,
hey, how's it going?
well, I don't know how well you can hear him. This was a study we did.
I'm good. Look, this is my wife's idea.
So a resistant patient, we built a motivational interviewing training system with a virtual patient, tested it at the Puget Sound VA, published in JAMA Open, and basically, I'll just let some of the results fly through. In this randomized control trial, we showed that just 45 minutes of practice with a virtual patient on top of the traditional online training showed immediate benefits with real-world interaction with a live actor patient, and 3-month follow-up benefits, that they did motivational interviewing much better, rated by experts in motivational interviewing that were blinded to the condition and the time course. They didn't know if it was baseline, post-training, 3-month follow-up, if it was a control group or the active group with a virtual patient. And the interesting thing was, when you did self-efficacy and confidence in delivering motivational interviewing, even the control group rated themselves high, even though they weren't as good as the virtual patient group. So a lot of times it's the problem we have. You take a course, you get your continuing eds, you're an expert. It's that engagement, that active practice, and that's what VR can do. So one of the big challenges that we have, though, is that we don't have a lot of training courses. We do have some, as we saw today with Brennan's work. You know, we're trying to get that going, but we need more. We do this regularly with the VA for our PTSD work, train clinicians, 2-day training programs, but you don't see this in graduate schools. You don't see specific coursework. Maybe there's a couple, you know, you can prove me a liar here, bring them up, but it needs to be a standardized thing so that young clinicians across all healthcare areas have some training and familiarity, not just with the clinical stuff, but how to use a damn headset and where to get it and all that stuff. So an area that we need to do better. Accessibility, well, I think this number is outdated. I think World Health Organization said there's something like 1 billion people on the planet with mental health conditions, fully of which 2/3 will never see the inside of a therapy office. So how can we break down barriers to care in terms of access, make treatment more appealing and more available to the masses of people that could benefit from it? One approach, Oxford VR, Dan Freeman's work here, you know, sending headsets home with patients to do their own fear of heights exposure therapy and getting equivalent, and if not, in some ways better clinical outcomes when the patient does it home. However, it's therapist supervised. Therapist does a diagnosis, sets a treatment plan, monitors the course, even though it's done at home. That sounds like a good idea. They're expanding it to major mental health conditions, paranoia, schizophrenia, and so on. And this group in the Netherlands has done a minimal but still clinician supervised treatment for PTSD, people doing some levels of exposure and other applications, other kind of cognitive behavioral things in home. That might be a toe in the water. I'm kind of old school. I think you got to get in the trenches when it comes to trauma. I want to see replication of this, extension of it. But it's a toe in the water, and it may break down barriers to care, getting someone to try something, because a lot of times people will live months, years, decades with PTSD and not seek help for it. There's evidence-based approaches that can make a difference. So toe in the water, let's see where that goes. Metaverse, as we've heard today, of course we all know that word has been around for a long time. Mr. Zuckerberg kind of popularized it recently, but we know these metaverse worlds have existed since the 90s and into the current time in good ways. So I'll show a couple of examples of that. And the metaverse, I think, has a value for making care available. Hide behind the avatar at first and be able to talk to people that have the same problems you have, or a clinician, reduce the stigma, toe in the water, and maybe a solid thing for direct clinical care, making it accessible and available to more people. So, examples in physical therapy, this group, which one is this? This is XR Health. You know, you can do all your physical therapy online. That's a little bit easier thing. You know, you're helping a person to do their exercise, even though there are psychological issues involved. It's a little bit different, but folks are also doing things with metaverse worlds with peer support, trained peers, running groups for people. Noah Robinson's work with Innerworld that's getting some traction now. And basically what they do is they have a training program for peers, not clinicians, so you know, you got to take that carefully. But they run, if you go on their site and look at every day, they got maybe 15 or 20 groups that are organized and run by peers that have some basic training and some light cognitive behavioral, highly manualized stuff. But they're getting people engaged in the healthcare process in a way they might not have access to otherwise. Our work, we've got the Virtual Ukraine project, where we use spherical imagery to create metaverse worlds that people, refugees and people can go in, and this is clinician facilitated, and I'll just this is our first pilot test with 3 individuals in Bucharest, in various areas of Bucharest. That's the clinician.
Я приехала в Румынию со своими
And typically, what we've seen is they talk, we've run 3 more of these. They talk about mundane issues of transition to other areas, the challenge of getting their kid into a school, and then it starts to build out into the grief and loss and their fears and hopes for the future, facilitated by a clinician. So challenge with this is getting people onboarded. You can do this on a flat screen like traditional old school stuff. It's better in a headset, but it's going to be a big lift getting that all through Ukraine and all these other places where you know, that barrier, that digital divide might exist. You can still do it on a flat screen monitor. Bring people together in a safe place and help them to share their experience and learn about what options are for more care when needed. What about improving accessibility by using, and I'm not going to say the C word today, well, I'll say it once, ChatGPT, with virtual humans. So we did work with this back in 2011, work with the military. This was a guy called SimCoach. Actually, his name was Bill Ford. And it was a way you could go online, interact with this guy, ask questions about PTSD, substance use, TBI, and he would ask you questions. If you reached a certain threshold, they were thinly veiled screening questions. If you reach a certain threshold, the character might say, hey, it looks like you're having some trouble. If you want, punch in your zip code down at the bottom, and I'll pop up a list of providers in your area. And if you got questions about what therapy involves, fire away. So not a doc in a box, not a virtual therapist, but a guide, a healthcare support agent. Let him introduce himself real quick.
Well, I'm not a real person, if that's what you're asking, but I'm based on the personality and experiences of real soldiers and Marines. I'm still just a piece of software, but I'm getting better all the time, so hopefully I can be a helpful piece of software to talk to.
Okay, so in 2014, we moved it up a notch and built a clinical interviewer that had cameras and microphones that could track facial expression, gesture, acoustic properties of speech, and update the way she would respond based on our inferences about the user's state.
I was created to talk to people in a safe and secure environment. I'm not a therapist, but I'm here to learn about people and would love to learn about you. I'll ask a few questions to get us started. And please feel free to tell me anything. Your answers are totally confidential. Are you okay with this?
Yes.
So, how are you doing today?
So, again, not a therapist, although there's a lot to be said about AI in therapy. They're always available. They have encyclopedic knowledge of every clinical condition, every treatment approach. They remember everything you say to them in the future when we build them. But we have to remember that a good part of the effect size of clinical benefit comes from a therapeutic alliance with a human being. And we can't forget that, that empathy, that understanding, that shared experience, that critical feedback at times you won't get from a friend, that's what therapy is about. But I think there's a role here for toes in the water or automating things or filling in gaps, but we have to tread lightly. So one example, more current stuff, this stuff is all continuing to evolve. One more modern version is some of my outside work with a group in Boston working with Mass General for healthcare professionals that are suspecting that they might be burnt out or they're dissatisfied or they're having psychological issues. Docs and nurses have at the top of the heap in the suicide rate for occupations. So this is what this looks like. This is in progress right now.
Hi, my name is Taylor. It is so nice to meet you. You are about to walk through a demonstration of my capabilities. I am going to skip some of the introductory conversation I would have with a real user. Also, for this demo, I will only be accessing a small amount of the knowledge that I have. My trainers have told me I'm not skilled enough yet to go beyond those areas.
So not therapy, but gives you the opportunity to answer questions from the professional quality of life assessment or other types of assessment, and then give you an instant bit of feedback as to where you stand and tips and tactics for how you might choose to deal with it. So like SimCoach, but more modern and a way to break down barriers to care and engage people in a way where they feel safe, where they feel like they're not being judged. So there's that. Final one on this front is one that we recently got funded from the VA to develop for their Mission Daybreak suicide prevention program. And it's putting these virtual humans on a mobile app for wellness, but also suicide safety planning. I'll just let this guy talk here.
Hello there, and welcome to Battle Buddy, where we combine conversational AI, sensing, wearables, and mobile technology to provide evidence-based wellness content, create and walk veterans in crisis through their personal suicide safety plan, and connect them to appropriate care when needed. My name is Kevin, and I'll be guiding you through our vision for suicide prevention and wellness. No one should ever have to face their toughest moments alone. Everyone deserves a non-judgmental friend that is there when they need them the most. That's what I'm here for. I won't let our vets down. Together, we're stronger. I'm a friend, a partner, a buddy. I've got your six. I am your battle buddy. Thank you for your time.
Okay, so that's work that's moving along. We're about 6 months from initial user testing with a basic prototype, and hopefully next year I'll have some data on that. Acceptability, reducing stigma. As we saw earlier, the idea of people being more likely to seek treatment with VR. Is it because they feel more comfortable? In this one, this came out like 3 or 4 days ago. 70% preference for VR over traditional exposure therapy for anxiety disorders. The acceptance rates higher and so on. So positive stuff going on there. This was one that was done with the military population, showing more acceptance with a population is often loath to seek treatment for PTSD. They don't want to admit they're weak. But even of the group that said they would never go to therapy, of that group, 20% said I would try it if technology was involved, in particularly VR. So a little bit of evidence there. Our study showing the difference between what people, service members and veterans would prefer to do if they had their choice. VR wins out 76%. Where are we now? Adaptability. Okay, we're getting near the end here. To make these things more, to break down barriers to care, you've got to have a better design and development process. And you've got to make it so that you use your resources more effectively. So when you build something, you're not just building a one-off, you're building something that you can translate in different ways. So first off, let's talk about customizing to the patient's needs. In PTSD, we have a clinician interface that in real time adjusts all the content in there so we can pace the experience, mimic what the patient is telling in their trauma narrative. That's one way of customizing it to clinician, to patient need that is generalizable to Ukrainian sufferers of trauma, which is now what we're working on with BraveMind, or perhaps even children that have had adverse childhood experiences, or teenagers perhaps might be a better population to address, because we know ACEs are directly related to physical and mental health conditions in adulthood. This is a automated algorithm for shaping. Instead of hitting the buttons as a clinician, it gives you advice on how to shape it, and maybe you hit the buttons, or maybe the software does it to update and present challenges relevant to a patient's needs. You know, far out stuff coming along. You can also take one thing and customize it in ways that appeal to different populations. This is from Penumbra, and they built this pinball machine for physical therapy. And you can do the circus version or the same dynamics, game dynamics in the sci-fi version, or whatever that version, the mushroom version. But you're appealing to a broader range of people based on their personal taste. So keep that in mind. Also, you build one thing, you can use it for another. Classic example for us was our PTSD application for exposure therapy in 2007. That's the old version. You can see how much the graphics have improved. But tests of attention, memory, executive function, using the same simulation. We didn't have to build that out. We're testing in a military relevant environment, testing these cognitive processes that also bring emotion into the mix by way of the context. Adherence, does VR promote adherence? Some studies show it. In this particular one for smoking cessation, this is one that got great values for physical therapy, getting people to stick with treatment. In our PTSD stuff, we saw a difference. VR was better, less dropout, but not quite. I think it was 0.07, not quite statistically significant. But it gives us a way also to look at why people drop out of therapy, and we need to study that, particularly in prolonged exposure where you have a high dropout rate. And is it past abuse, people that have an abuse history, and so on. So a lot of factors there, but this is where VR might have the magic in keeping people engaged in therapy, keeping them involved in mindfulness learning. You know, you got somebody with chronic pain and you try to teach them mindfulness in a clinical office face-to-face. It takes a few sessions to get the hang of it, to get the effect. A lot of times people with chronic pain, they don't have the patience for that. You give them something that engages them, like some of the stuff that Brennan was talking about today. It gets them engaged. Maybe that's a way to boost adherence. Finally, affordability. This is a no-brainer. I don't have to lecture on this one. You know, if you look at, you know, what the Quest or the Pico Neo or the HTC headsets do at the cost that you can get it now, you would have to spend 10 years ago on an NVIS headset $20,000 and maybe have a 60-degree diagonal field of view, and it was heavy, cumbersome, low resolution comparative. So we're in a great spot. If all tech development ceases, if the VR world collapses in the entertainment and game industry, we got enough technology to carry us for a long time. Headsets that have sensors that pick up heart rate built into the headset, eye tracking, of course, becoming pedestrian, pupillary dilation. All these things are of real value and at a low cost. And of course, delivering, there's talk about VR delivered from the browser itself, but you know, when a clinician can go through a library of content up in the cloud, pick out a specific thing, look at the research that supports it, bing, and it's running in their standalone headset, that's when we're really gonna be able to break down the barriers to adoption. Finally, a company that's been around, you know, since 1997, Virtually Better. There was a dry spell, and people tried to start up companies. They weren't so successful, but now we're at the point where in the last 3 or 4 years, we have more commercial entities competing and reducing costs than in the previous 20 years. So we're in a great spot there. Let's see, I think that's one more. Yeah, there we go. Oh, one more. All right, that's it. This was something I just saw yesterday. I threw it in, market analyses. You see a lot of these. Send me an email, I'll send you a link to this because they cite all the different market analyses by different groups and so on for different areas of VR healthcare as well. To end, my last slide, some of the assumptions about clinical VR: too expensive, not enough research, it's dangerous, could re-traumatize people with PTSD, all that stuff. Well, first off, on a scientific level, deterioration analysis. This came out in 2019, showing that VR exposure therapy led to looking at people that didn't get better, no higher level than any other active treatment, and much better than a weightless control. So Deborah Bidell tracked people down that dropped out of VR exposure a year later and found they were no worse for wear, they weren't worse. So, we have something here that has value. Of course, there's a lot of ill-informed comments, and I'm going to finish right here. And we have to be able to address this with our colleagues, with our patients, and in the general public. So with that, the Barriers to Care project is emerging. I'm setting up a website, going to try to put together a whole library of content that we can use to help support that area and make a difference for more people as we move forward. So sorry I went over a little bit. You expected it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, what a tour de force, as always. You can talk as long as you'd like, Skip. We'll stick around.